We're live.
Okay. This is Senate Appropriations, and we still have a number of bills to get through today. So the first one we're gonna take up is H 626. We had that referred to us yesterday afternoon. Did not have it even go on the notice calendar, so we have Michael Grady here, from, Ledge Council. And then we have the reporter, from Government Operations. And so if you wanna, come up, Mike, run through the bill, and then we will, have the reporter. And then this bill went to finance because, of course, there is a fee, involved, and then how they would propose the revenue to be, spent. So, we have the bill here. In the budget itself, we actually funded an additional game warden to provide more resources to deal with investigations of animal abuse. So this would be on top of that additional position that has already been reflected in the budget that we are going to hopefully pass. So I'll let you take it from here, Mike, in terms of running through what the bill does, and then we'll open it up.
This is Mike O'Grady with the City Council talking to you about H 626. For years, animal welfare and its administration and enforcement has been an issue around the state. There is no one centralized entity that does oversee or coordinate or administer the state's animal welfare laws. It's left to municipalities and mistakenly at times to state agencies that don't actually have the authority. For example, the Agency of Agriculture is often called about animal cruelty laws, and they don't have animal cruelty authority. They're consulted when it's livestock, but it's not something where they are the ones that are enforcing the laws. A couple of years ago, you directed the Department of Public Safety to have a study committee to come up with a proposal on how to centralize the administration, enforcement, and implementation of animal welfare laws in the state. They recommended that an animal welfare division be established, but they recommended that it be established at the Agency of Agriculture. The Agency of Agriculture thinks an animal welfare division should be established, but not at the Agency of Agriculture.
So it's a classic Alphonse Gaston kind of.
The Department of Fish and Wildlife is taking on the responsibility with the wardens that you have just referenced, but the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife specifically testified in House Government Operations that he does not believe that the department is the appropriate place for the long-term administration and implementation of animal welfare laws in the state. So what this bill does was originally much longer. It originally included standards of care and licensing for animal shelters and rescue organizations, import of dogs and cats in those businesses that are engaged in that. But it's been pared down to just to establish an animal welfare division at the Department of Public Safety. And it's currently a one-person division made up of a director of animal welfare.
Currently in the bill?
In the bill. That would develop a plan for the administration and enforcement, collaboration, coordination of animal welfare laws in the state. Is that position specified, appointed or hired by the Commissioner of Public Safety, paid for by a surcharge on the dog license fees. Currently, there is a $1 fee on dog licenses for rabies control. That fee would be increased to $3. The $1 that's currently charged would remain for rabies control, and the other additional $2 would go into a special fund, animal welfare special fund, to pay for the director at the Department of Public Safety. The only other appropriations issue is that part of the plan that the director is required to produce is supposed to do two things appropriations related. One is to try to to calculate what the cost is to the state already in responding to animal welfare complaints, because the state agencies that respond, like the Agency of Agriculture, the Department of Public Safety Division, they don't necessarily code that is what they're responding to. There is no code at the Office of Legislative Counsel for me to take an animal welfare call, which I get. And so there's going to be that measurement, hopefully, or estimate of what it costs the state already. And then the plan will also recommend funding for a long-term implementation of the division, including private funding sources, which may be available for things such as when animals are seized, how to pay for their care after they are seized.
So how, right now, and the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife has said to us, they're the central point now.
They are.
Whether, and we just put in an additional resource to help them carry that out. Is there anything that connects, in other words, that investment that we made, we would want to have, obviously, we're talking about almost cost allocated, because if you've got a warden in Bennington, and maybe the new position is some, I don't know where, maybe it's in central Vermont. That was in addition to the resources that are already being allocated. If there is something that recognizes that additional staff investment and the sort of the cost allocated or the time that is already being spent on the part of state game wardens.
So not specifically, there is a requirement that the plan that's proposed by the division director address how to coordinate administration and enforcement of animal welfare laws in the state in a collaborative manner. Because most of the animal welfare laws are crimes, and so any law enforcement officer can enforce them. And many municipalities under their ordinance authority have the ability to regulate animal welfare as well. So there are resources and entities that have authority to enforce animal welfare right now. One of those is Fish and Wildlife. And this plan will address how to coordinate that in a manner that's more effective than it is now. I'm sure you've all heard stories about the failure of the existing system to respond in an appropriate way, whether it's the goats in Charlotte, the dogs in Franklin County, the horses, and you know, it's there are examples across the state. And then the second component of that is how to address that funding. Well, I already addressed that the plan is supposed to look at a way to basically quantify how much the state is already spending, and that spending at the Department of Fish and Wildlife will obviously be part of that.
Okay, so the fiscal note here that we have. Yeah, maybe you can explain it. It's estimated annual revenue as proposed. The 31.5, there's Fish and Wildlife. Can you explain that? I mean, maybe I'm changing, did you get into that at all?
So the existing surcharge is divided between three entities for rabies control. There's a percentage that goes to Agency of Ag, a percentage that goes to the Department of Health, and a percentage that goes.
And that's what's reflected here then.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you. Questions of Mike in terms of the bill.
So the fees start January 1st. That's an increase in fees.
Yes,
January 1st, 2025.
Right, everything's been moved out to January 1st, 2025. That came from the House Appropriations Amendment. The concept being to lessen or to push the responsibility a little bit further down the road because of the other things that public safety is doing in order to respond to some of the laws in this year and last year.
Okay. So this is interesting because this is within public safety, but the resources we put in were in Fish and Wildlife.
Well,
And
I just make the comment that we've gone for decades and haven't been able to figure this one out. and everybody's tossed it around like a football. And for a change, we moved into a place where we put resources into Fish and Wildlife and forced them into doing it, because even though they didn't want to. And I gotta say, moving this over to public safety to do the look at it, I'm not opposed, but it just feels funny.
I think wherever you cite it, there's going to be a response that it doesn't quite fit perfectly.
It doesn't fit because this is hard work and there's controversy every single time you do this. And we need to have somebody trained to do it, whether they want to do it or not.
The Agency of Agriculture doesn't want to do domestic pets. Fish and Wildlife, they want to do fish and game. Public safety doesn't want to really do any of it.
Well,
They're not going to.
Right,
and when you walk in a yard, people are angry.
right.
And the town's gonna do.
Any
I'll
other
get this
questions
together.
of mine? Obviously, this is, I mean, the select board, I don't know, maybe the law used to, but the select boards used to have a responsibility as well. I remember a farmer who was starving and just throwing the dead carcasses, and it was a horrific situation, but that would be back in the 50s.
Right, and.
The select board had
and
to
that-
deal with that.
That still happens. There's still towns that authorize an animal control officer who has no law enforcement training. No necessary training at all. I mean, there's some bad stories out there.
Did this
Well-
bill used to have some, sorry,
Go ahead.
did this bill have training for? animal
There's
control?
there's training already built into some of the underlying requirements of animal welfare, but this bill will address training as well.
So what,
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
what did public safety, you know what they said?
I think the last time I heard testimony was in finance and they're still not ecstatic, but they're basically said that they're gonna do it and they're just concerned.
They're gonna do it or they're gonna write the report.
Or an hired person?
Both, it's either they're gonna hire the person, because the report doesn't happen until they hire the person.
Well, one person's not gonna do the whole state.
Oh,
No, they'll have to work with the collective
Right.
resources.
And you will get a recommendation on, for example, Maine has an animal welfare division. It's pretty fully staffed. It has an annual budget of about $2 million. You'll probably get a recommendation on what you would need for that type of coordinated effort in Vermont from this plan.
see, the large animals, you know, horses and cows and sheep, you know, the ag agencies have been dealing with that, but when you get down to dogs and cats and ferrets and all the other animals that we had, it's not good. Even the big animals, it's rough across over at ag dealing with that, but at least they usually get another farmer to help take the cows and.
Well, then you've got the issue around boarding and the costs and where that comes in. This is gonna be larger. I think what we're seeing is obviously when we're creating an office and you're looking at what the state of Maine has done. The surcharge here is a pittance compared to what, creation of a dedicated entity to address this. And so this is going to be coming back, obviously, in terms of how the extent to which general fund revenues are present to
Or to find a revenue source. There are, for example, in Maine, they have surcharges on other things that partly fund their division, not fully, but partly.
yeah. And then, of course, as you say, there's a lot of charitable work, I mean, with the shelters and. So we have this bill, it's giving the responsibility to public safety. The argument is to enforce the law. that relates around to this, treatment and care of animals. It's beginning step, I would suggest we're probably gonna have to look at our collective resources, to really address it, but where they are, how to get them organized, how to get people trained, and, have some kind of shared responsibility. It's gonna be quite a task, so, we're getting this because the bill creates the position and obviously, uses the revenue to fund the position. So,
If you're looking for a motion, I will
Well,
move. the-
should we hear from the board?
She'll be happy that we just vote for it. Let you have the other.
well, Senator Watson, if you wanna, make any other comments about this. And also the amendment that came, from government operations coming up.
Sure, there's not a whole lot more, I would say, and just in terms of why the Department of Public Safety, I think it's already been said, but what we did hear testimony in government operations about state's attorneys declining to prosecute cases because whoever collected the evidence didn't do it properly, and so it really needs to be investigated by people that have experience with collecting evidence that's admissible into court and have experience going on to somebody else's property, right, when that is not always a welcome.
Well, you know, interestingly enough, the first child abuse case, child welfare case, was brought to court under animal cruelty.
Oh,
There was not a child welfare.
Yeah.
No.
wow.
When was that? 1900s, I mean, it was a long time ago, that was before you had specifically child welfare, the first case came in under animal cruelty.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
Um,
so, but that's,
Yeah. Well, and then the only other thing I would add is that the government operations amendment is pretty minimal. It just adds one aspect that the plan ought to address in terms of imported animals, as well as legislative council indicated that nobody is coding for the calls that we get in terms of complaints about animal welfare that doesn't have a specific code. And so one of the things that they're going to try to do is to estimate the number and type of animal welfare related complaints. So we can get a handle on what that how much of a burden this is and tax on our resources. And then there's just a technical correction. It's
where's
just,
50 versus 67, can you explain that?
yeah.
So
Yeah,
this
actually-
bill is passed the House, well. In the House, they have first only increased the surcharge by $1. So the special fund was only getting 50% of the surcharge. But then it was increased to $2 and they were getting 67%, but they never changed the 50 to the 67.
Okay.
I never changed the 50.
Okay, I understand that,
Percentage.
just right, yeah. Other questions, anything else, Senator, you want? Good question.
So,
So we have a very, I'm gonna motion, or we have a
Yeah,
motion.
We made a
made
motion
by-
and I second.
Oh, all right.
No, the
So our
clerk-
clerk has become, well, he's even calling the roll before I ask.
The
Is
clerk has a lot of comments.
the clerk needs to be a little more patient. The question is, do we have any more questions or discussion? Are we ready to call the question?
I,
The clerk is.
I.
The clerk is, but forget about him. Senator
Yes,
Starr.
right, forget it then. We're okay with money for, 25 or?
No, the rate, the increase on the surcharge on the dog will fund the position, the new, so the bill not only creates the position, it clearly articulates where the locus of responsibilities will reside, which is public safety, and it appropriates the money raised by the surcharge to support the cost of the position.
And the other question, and it's only a question, you go to buy your dog food or cat food, any of that toys. You know, you see people picking up good stuff. And
Well, you want the best for your baby.
Benny.
Benny.
then he likes eating like his dad eats. Better than his dog food.
Yeah, so your point, Senator
But my
Starr.
point is, I wonder, is there any like sales tax on that stuff that would?
Sales tax goes into the ed fund.
Everything there.
Yeah,
We could designate pet food sales.
yeah, so,
I was just wondering.
No.
Yeah. But no, I'm fine with the bill. I mean, we should make sure that there's gonna be ample funds there, but that'll be next year's,
well, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, other questions about this? Then we will have the clerk call the roll.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Got your pen?
Senator Noel?
Yes.
Senator Purchase?
Yes.
Oh, Senator Starr?
Yes.
Senator Westman, yes. Senator Kitchell?
Yes.
Okay.
Who has public safety? Huh?
I think it's
Oh, I think it's Sears. But he's
But I'm
not
willing to
here.
do it.
I'll do it.
All right, we'll have ag,
West.
we'll have Senator Weston do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our next bill, is 612, and it's cannabis bill, and so, we have. And I don't know who drafted it. Oh, Michelle, you're the candidate, okay.
Cannabis queen.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yes, and we also
I think
have
it's a
James
compliment.
Pepper here from, Cannabis Board,
As a packet.
so,
Notice cannabis gets color, where others no.
So, we're getting this because we're getting some reduction in fees. We have a fiscal impact in terms of revenue loss to the fund. But hopefully we make it up with the other line of business.
Would you like to hear from Ted first on fiscal stuff, or I was just gonna show you the language?
So why don't you just run through what the bill does and then we can get to the fiscal
Okay.
and then.
What I'm gonna do is, so for the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel, I'm gonna take you to the underlying bill as passed by the House first, because there is a transfer and appropriation from the Cannabis Regulation Fund to the Cannabis Business Development Fund. And then I'm gonna take you to the Senate Economic Development Committee amendment, which creates a study committee around how to use the excise tax. And then.
How do you see excise tax? Well, we already have put some fence around that and up to 10 million would go to prevention activities. So we're gonna study what happens to anything above this 10?
Yeah, I will show you the language.
That's all right.
Is this in the House bill?
No, this is in the Senate Economic
In the
Development,
Senate Economic?
The study
Right.
is.
the study.
They'll get the right things.
Except. Well, all right, we can study it, but right now, other than what's carved out. For prevention goes to the general fund. So if people are thinking that somehow we have general fund money to give up to be other places. Well, I suppose. They can look at it, but if we're looking at the budget next year, our ability to sort of take on. Or divert more money out of what is the general fund, it becomes a real problem. I'm just letting people in the room know that, because, there is a lot more desire for spending than there are revenues, and we've got some very significant budgetary increases next year, including our pension, funding, and which is going up to 15 million, and we've got a number of other areas where we know that, some of that organic growth that's anticipated, is going to, create some real budgetary pressures. So I'm just interested about the study committee determining how excise taxes that right now would go into the general fund would be subject to, recommendations of how they might be spent differently, but that's, I guess we'll have to put someone from the committee on the committee.
So I'm gonna walk you through first what is in the underlying bill with regard to the cannabis regulation fund and the cannabis business development fund. So just as a little refresher, so your the excise tax is going into the cannabis, the regulation fund now. That ends on July for next year, so it's through FY 25. Your cannabis business development fund is what's contained in there are monies appropriated from the General Assembly. It's used to provide low interest loans and grants to social equity applicants and pay for outreach to social equity applicants and job training. And so this language that you see in section 15, which is in the House proposal and is still standing in the Senate Economic Development, they did not change that, would be a transfer of $500,000 from the Cannabis Regulation Fund to the Cannabis Business Development Fund, and then appropriating that $500,000 from the Cannabis Business Development Fund to the Agency of Commerce Community Development, because they administer a program for the social equity program. So this is language, you had the same language and you enacted the same language last year in the miscellaneous cannabis bill. So that's just the appropriation.
The 19 is just left over.
It's just a little paper. that keeps-
Okay.
So moving on to the Senate Economic Development Amendment. So it's not suggesting any changes to that appropriation, but it creates this new working group. And we'll see there, for the purpose of making recommendations to the General Assembly regarding a percentage of cannabis excise tax monies that should be appropriated to the Cannabis Business Development Fund.
To avoid having to do it once every year, making that transfer that you just talked about. Otherwise, if we wanted to fund it, we'd do that every year.
Correct. So you can just see the numbers on the committee.
Is there some? At some point, is this a time limited activity? I mean, is there some saturation of the market and how many, businesses? Development, I'm just wondering, how, as you're looking at what is viable, certainly, seems like.
How many new business,
Yeah,
new business can
uh-huh.
open?
I have no idea at what point, you, and do we have any limit on? We do have some limits, right, on licenses and so forth.
They're not, well, you can only own one type of each license, but there's not a cap on the number of licenses.
There's
that can
not.
be issued. And I think your questions would be better for, Chair Pepper.
Yeah, I thought some of the tiers were not open to expand. I mean, I don't know if that's called a cap or not, but if you're a tier like 2 or 3, I think Pepper could answer.
Yeah, I'm sure it can. I guess we're doing a couple of things, one of which is recognizing sort of the phasing out of our medical side. And the number of how that would fit relative to, the dispensaries that are having to be developed. So this is just one piece. The working group is one piece of the bill.
Right, there's a number of other pieces related to allowing retailers to obtain medical endorsements to sell to registered medical patients. There's a lot relating to citing. And there's a number of amendments related to that around setbacks and land use and cultivators. There's a number of amendments there that came from Center Lions Committee around the medical program, not trying to phase it out, but prop it up. There are monies in there when it was across the hall in finance. There's a reduction in the fees for dispensaries because the fees for dispensaries were set fairly high at the time when they were created, and those have been lowered in the underlying bill, and that still remains.
Right. Let's keep running through it, because we're getting in more.
So those are the only two things related to the kind of appropriation issue. If you want me to go over what happened across the hall, I'm happy to do that, if you want to understand.
You mean in terms of the fees?
Yes,
But I think, do they have to amend the fee finding?
finance did not amend it, but they did take a look at the fees because the fees are in the underlying bill that comes from the House.
All right, I'm just looking at, the extent to which we want to look at the financial piece here. And exactly what that impact is going to be, and so, yes, Senator Lyons, do you have a question about?
I do,
Or
about, well, I was looking
otherwise,
at,
I'm gonna have Ted come up and make sure.
all right, well, we can go through the money, but I was looking at section 15 and the 15, the working group, yeah, the equity working group, and were they discussing looking at the funds that are left over after the distribution of funds for the prevention? What are they? What are they looking at exactly? They're gonna redistribute everything and try to sort it out all over again, or
There
just the?
wasn't a lot of detail. My recollection was that the original ask came from the growers around to designate 20% of excise tax to social equity applicants, and in lieu of that, created the study committee to make a recommendation on that issue. But
What of all of the funds that are taken in by the excise tax without regard for what we've already appropriated?
those details were not discussed in Senate committee.
Okay, I mean, would have a real concern. Redoing. everything.
Well, I don't think that they were talking about redoing the language in the 10 million allocated already for prevention,
I would hope not.
but as I say, that the other part is how much of these revenues are assumed, and right now, except for, I guess, it's 500,000, which is, you said it's currently being done, and this would continue.
Right, it was done definitely last year and was maybe done the year before. I know that you have, because the only monies that are, maybe you might remember that when we first created it, it was just monies that were appropriated and there was like an initial amount of money that was put in there. And then in subsequent year, you started putting you started putting the excise tax in there because the board was having a hard time being able to support the operation, everything that they're required to do by just from the licensing fees. But then that ends in July of next year.
Okay.
So you'll have to kind of take a look at that and think about where things are going after FY 25.
All right, I just, what I'm struggling with, obviously, is that the expectations of what this committee is gonna do and how much money there's going to be, and understanding the sort of some of the fiscal parameters or realities of what we're dealing with, because I have a feeling that, you might have a desire to allocate money in ways that might, but we don't want to jeopardize the allocation already for prevention and the 10 million that's been carved out for that. And then the other question is then the extent to which it has implications for the general fund that goes in to support the overall budget for the state of Vermont. So that's kind of the perspective that I'm bringing to the discussion. In other words, how much really is there for that kind of discretionary? Let's look at how we would like to spend money in a different way, because part of the whole reason for the bill was to, the financial benefits of state government, so. All right.
And I will just mention that Senator Harrison has an amendment, and one of her instances of amendment is replacing the Senate Economic Development Working Group with a different working group, but to look at the same issue.
Because, and partly that's because there are at least two other groups that are doing reports that are almost the same as what was recommended. And there was no coordination between.
Okay, well, we, certainly know with, animal welfare, we've already got something potentially is gonna need funding. So there's a whole host of, competing issues here. Okay, other questions for Michelle as it would relate to the bill? Otherwise, I think probably Ted could help us with, the fiscal impact and then,
That's some long iron that they find on page 1 and on page 2.
Of what, the fiscal note?
Yeah.
and then I know that I had a talk with the chair of economic development, and so, there is an amendment that, Senator Harrison will, and we can do it here, and then we'll make it more because of time compression. That would help us kind of calibrate these multiple groups and, make sure that we are, aligning the work in such a way that it doesn't create more duplication or confusion about who's doing what or whatever. So Ted, you wanna, help us with this here,
Sure.
so the fiscal impact.
Yes, and I will primarily be working on the two tables that are on page 2 of the fiscal note. To start, there are a few special fund fiscal impacts. One is adding ulcerative colitis as a qualifying condition. This would create additional revenue for the Cannabis Regulation Fund, simply because you have more folks who would qualify as a medical patient, they would get their patient cards, and that would generate a little bit of additional revenue. There is another provision, this was in section 8 of the as passed House version. I didn't necessarily update my section number, so I hope it's the same one. Yes, there's provision that would extend the renewal period for patients who qualify under chronic pain. All other qualifying conditions for a medical patient have to renew every 3 years, and so this would essentially harmonize folks with chronic pain with the rest of people, folks participating in the medical program. And so in fiscal year 25, since folks won't be renewing, their card would be good for 3 years, there would be an estimated approximately $100,000 in revenue loss for the regulation fund. And then there is this piece of reducing fees on medical dispensaries, understanding the medical market is changing and those fees were once set at a certain level and now the medical market is different and there may need to be a reduction in fees to support dispensaries. I will note that I just heard from Chair Pepper that there are currently only 5 medical dispensaries in the state, one just closed. So, and there may be another one that is on route to closing, so this $100,000, take it with a bit of a grain of salt because you're not gonna get fee revenue from one dispensary that's closed.
I was gonna say, actually, this is a declining.
Yes.
Revenue source, okay. All right, so that comes up to, you totaled it, so then the combined fiscal impacts.
Sure, so yes, that piece, so ran through fiscal year 25. In thinking about more of the long-term impacts, when folks are a medical patient, they don't pay the 14% excise tax and the 6% sales tax. And so in fiscal year 25, people who qualify using ulcerative colitis wouldn't be paying those taxes. A very small hit to the general fund and education fund from that piece. In fiscal year 26, there's a larger impact because of the medical use endorsement. So there's a provision that would allow retailers a whole set of conditions. They would be able to serve medical patients.
And they would not be subject to the sales tax and excise tax under those conditions.
Folks who qualify in the medical program would not be paying those taxes. And so in our estimate, so in the first year, we're assuming that a relatively small number of retailers would take this up, essentially understanding whether it's worth it to them, whether it makes business sense. And so we estimated a small general fund and education fund impact from essentially the first wave of retailers who take on this medical use endorsement. And then wanted to show that in fiscal year 27, if this is a popular program, if it does provide medical patients with the access to the program, and it encourages folks who once were in the medical market before the retail market opened up, that in fiscal year 27, the up to approximately 500,000, up to 200,000 will reflect if the number of medical patients reflected the number of medical patients that existed before the retail market opened. I'm assuming, right, that many of those folks are participating in the retail market because it's easier for them to access the dispensaries in their community, right? And so they're currently paying excise and sales taxes, and it would be kind of a
Well, you're,
bad impact.
okay, that's pretty straightforward. I guess if you're looking at longer term trends, I'm looking at section 4 in terms of what happened in Massachusetts. And that's what you're seeing there in terms of the retail price and when that falls, obviously the taxes generated also is impacted. So we have a lot of things that are going to impact the future here in this world. So in terms of this year, it's really within the special fund and it's kind of negligible. It's a general fund and education fund based on your analysis.
That's right.
Senator Starr.
Yeah, so right now are these medical, people that are buying medical marijuana, they paying some,
No,
Folks,
no,
no.
no.
they aren't paying, so it wouldn't be any different. But you said we were going to lose.
But right now, it's, I think what it's doing is expanding where that group could get access. And then, and which has been quite restrictive historically. So what this is doing is allowing the sale and extending that exemption from sales and excise tax to those new enrolled points of distribution or sales.
Yes, and the point I would add is there's a graph, I wish I could pull it up, that shows, and it's in kind of the monthly reporting that the Cannabis Control Board does, is there's a graph that shows historically the number of folks who have a medical card. And before the retail market opened, it was quite a bit higher than it currently is. So what I'm looking at in the data is saying that those folks likely entered the retail market. They decided that the retail market was accessible to them. They had a dispensary, and so they were willing to buy their cannabis in the retail market
Rather than
the medical market. And so the folks who were to, let their patient card lapse would say, oh, I can now participate in the medical program at the retail establishment that's in my community. I'm going to get my patient card and then be exempt from.
So. Okay, I think we understand what's happening. The bill summary is really outlining. My question is, was it in Colorado and other states where people, it was, if you had a doctor's statement, you could get it. So my question is there any indication that, I guess because we're so prescriptive about the diagnosis that would qualify to get the exemption from the taxes and allow access through a more expanded and more accessible use of entities that are able to sell for medical purposes. I mean, that the diagnosis requirements are still here. We're just adding one other. And so that process would remain as is. I just want to confirm that. It's
It
not
is,
just
but
any, yeah,
The
okay.
age 21 and under will have to have a 3-month relationship with a physician in order to be given a card. And then folks over 21 will.
But in some states, I don't think it was diagnosis specific and it wasn't as narrow. And so if you just got a statement from a doctor, you could, somehow, access, the cannabis. So that's, but we're keeping all that intact.
Yes, and there's language in the bill that our committee worked on to improve the language somewhat.
All right. Other comments, Chad, then, maybe we could have, Senator Harrison, present the amendment relative to the various groups that people have wanted to create and how we can harmonize them.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Wendy Harrison, Senator from Wyndham District. Have you discussed the amendment? Because we have 2 amendments now. We have the amendment from our committee, and now we have the second amendment.
Just seen the vision.
So would you like me to go through the bill as the Economic Development Housing Committee?
So,
Or
yeah.
I'm sorry, you know.
So they're just focusing on the money. And I showed them the transfer from the Cannabis Regulation Fund to the Cannabis Business Development Fund. That's in the underlying House version. And then the section that is in the Senate Economic Development Amendment, creating the working group.
Okay.
And so yours, in terms of money, is only looking at replacing the working group with a different working group.
Okay.
And so you should talk to them about
So that's
that.
really
So
all
that would
we
be a
want.
minimal.
That's right. All we
Change.
wanted, you to present to us what would be that replacement amendment that we would do here when we move the bill out favorably.
Okay,
And deal with.
so.
And I think you have a copy
yeah.
of it, kind of.
I think she gave them to me, so.
So this is this one here, that's.
It's,
She's handing it out.
5/9,
Michelle Child's 12.
11/06.
It should say MOP.
It's a,
Yeah, it
Oh,
says
okay,
and here's another.
All right.
one. I do like for everybody.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm. So this is.
So this is the amendment that was just created today.
Yes, that's what.
And this is, I think you talked about this inadvertently, or maybe, but because this is where the, Cannabis Control Board is going to work in consultation with the VHCB, Vermont Land Access and Opportunity Board, Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. I believe this is what you were just speaking about, where we would be combining
That's right.
groups.
So we were looking forward to this amendment that you're gonna present that would harmonize and sort of.
Yes.
Align the various
Yes,
groups and.
combine instead.
Yes,
And then there are other changes that it makes to the bill. Would you like me to go through those?
so,
I don't think they have significant monetary impact.
no, I don't
Okay.
think so. Mike, you're the drafter, and you.
Right, the other amendments are largely regarding citing and land use. In Senator Harrison's amendment, I don't know if you are interested in that at all.
The one that we have here
Yes.
about the working group.
So I think you're just looking at the 7th instance of amendment on the Harrison draft.
That's correct. And.
As far as the money's concerned, because there are others, so.
I'm a bit confused because I thought you're going to offer this then. On the floor, because I thought somebody was saying we were gonna offer the amendment here. When we move the bill out favorably as amended, but I'm a little confused in terms of. Yes.
Yeah, I went to, the chair of economic development after speaking with Pepper to talk about the committees and combining the
Mhm.
committees. And, that's where the the development of the substitute for the committee's team. The chair of economic development, when we met with them, said there needs to be these other pieces put in. And she asked if appropriations would think about working with them, and appropriations do it all in 1 minute.
There'd be a lot.
Which really isn't, when we got that, they're really setbacks in zoning, which are not really the purview of this committee.
No, that's,
But
well,
she asked that it all be done in 1 amendment.
so the question ultimately is whether this amendment should more appropriately be,
Done by.
done by economic
Okay.
development. Because it certainly is more than sort of the calibration of the study groups. It is,
Yes.
it's, as I'm looking at this, it's like the Eighth Amendment, for example. Being established 100 versus 50, that gets, that usually is, not something that we catch into. So I'm thinking that maybe, the original thought that we would just simply do it as an amendment and, coming out of this committee in light of the fact that it's got multiple components that are beyond certainly the fiscal, that, we should move the bill out, favorably with the understanding that you're gonna be, offering this amendment.
Okay.
On behalf of Economic Development Committee. So
moved.
okay.
Sorry.
We like to accommodate, and we do add amendments, but this amendment turned out to be a little bit more expensive than originally thought. So I think,
Okay.
we'll rely on you to, present it.
I will do my best.
And then the bill comes up for action. I'm sure you'll do fine. So the clerk is gonna call the roll, unless there's any more discussion. Okay.
Brew,
Yes.
Lyons,
Yes.
Birchland,
Yes.
your Star,
Yes.
Westman, Jess, Mitchell.
Yeah.
Okay,
And the reporter should be,
I'll do it.
okay, agricultural, don't you think?
Sure.
It's money. I suppose we all could lay claim to it.
I think it's transportation.
Aquarius.
All right.
Just make more.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Michelle.
We'll have that later.
Now, is Chris out here?
I can check.
Yeah, he is.
Congrats, you. Wow.
Yeah. You
You're confused.
All right, we're gonna take up 8:78.
One, there's this.
All right, okay. I don't know where Senator Westman went, but our next, bill that we're gonna take up, and has not been referred to us simply for time, I asked that it not be referred.
Yeah.
But it,
Sure.
Yeah.
This is.
Yeah, I'm sending you something.
So, we have, H 878, which we don't have in our possession officially, but for time expediency, we're gonna take it up so we can speak to it, and in support of it. And the reason it's really important here is the one section about the $47. So I'm gonna have Eric and Chris come up and just, go through it quickly so we can, speak to what is the fiscal, piece of it. And then we can simply indicate that we reviewed it and moved the bill, although we didn't vote, we support the bill. So I don't know who wants to speak. Both of you wanna
Should
come
I
up?
do a quick 2 minutes and I'll give it to you? I can just do a quick background.
Sure, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
All right, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you. Eric, back in the office of legislative council.
We don't get to see you very often.
I know, I was
Well, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you see him all the time.
Sure. In fact, we had similar seats in the other room. Right, but anyway, great to see everybody and, here to chat, as the chair mentioned, about H 878, which is the annual judiciary miscellaneous bill. There's literally dozens of different legal issues involved in here, which sounds like you're not looking for a walkthrough of all those,
No,
but but the section you're focusing on, I'll give you a minute or two of background, at least to the extent you may have. It's in section 12 of the bill as it's passed out of the Judiciary Committee. And it deals with a surcharge that is imposed right now. Anytime anyone gets charged with a crime or with a civil offense, you know, traffic ticket, any other civil offense, there's a fine that's associated with it. That could
No,
be
I'm just looking, you said 12?
12, exactly.
You know what page it is here?
My version is page 9,
Well, 9, I'm on.
although the language itself is on page 10.
Okay.
But the section starts on page 9. Is that the same version that everyone has, perhaps?
I don't think I got it.
No, I think.
Wait, I'll have it. It's okay.
There's no.
We don't have it, oh, yeah.
If Christopher Chuck Fiscal,
We do,
If
we
anyone
have it
has-
right here.
today's calendar, it's on page 4581 too.
No, this is 6:40, oh, this is 6:45, I'm on the wrong one.
It's in
Okay, all right, it's, in today's calendar.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You, Thursdays, what page again, Chris?
4581.
80. I've got it right here. No wonder, because I had it clipped.
These are-
Okay, and it has for any offense or
Yes.
whatever. Yes,
Any-
okay.
There's a surcharge that's imposed, this is current law.
Uh-huh.
And this surcharge, amongst other things, goes to support two funds, it has for many years. These two funds are the Victims Compensation Special Fund and the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. So now I should say, the entirety of the surcharge doesn't go to support those funds, but a portion of it goes. And this portion has changed over time. If you were to look, for example, at the calendar you look at, you'll see the subdivisions starts at 8A and then B, then C, then D. Over the years, the amount of the it hasn't gone down yet, I'm afraid, no. It seems to be going in an upward trajectory. And the amount of that surcharge that goes to these two funds has also changed over the years. What has happened recently, and I think Chris will be able to speak to this in more detail, is that these two funds, the Victims Compensation Special Fund and the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund, have been losing their
Well, they haven't been prosecuted.
there haven't been as many surcharges imposed, and hence the money that's been available for victims and in their funds has been decreasing. So for a couple of years now, there's been consideration in the legislature about what do we do about that? Was there some other manner of providing some money? So what's done in this provision, this is subdivision E, which is the new language, you'll see that under existing law, under the currently existing law, this amount of this, there's this $47 surcharge, and of that, $29.75 right now goes to the Victims Compensation Special Fund. Well, this proposes to bump that up.
The $33.50.
Yes, I was gonna try and say how much, but I couldn't do the math that quickly.
Oh,
So-
oh, you were gonna give us the info.
Try, yes, how much? I dropped the ball.
33.75.
The 375, then, right. And then and now that, there's also a portion of it that goes to the other fund, which is currently $10, and that goes up to $13.50. So that goes up by $3.50. So that's the proposal. I don't think it changes the amount of the charge, it's just the portion of it that goes to.
Doesn't change what it's used for.
No,
Correct.
no,
So yeah, I can't see why we would care.
no, that's why we would have the bill, is simply because of that, change in the way in which the, $47 is allocated.
Exactly.
Okay, questions, Mary? We could keep you here for a long time. I think so.
But one, if you're ever interested in anything else in the bill, happy to chat with you about it, there's a lot in there.
Did we have a bill earlier in the year about the domestic and sexual violence special fund? Or was that just
We put more money in.
in that fund from some other, or just as an appropriation to fund that work?
Um,
Okay. Just remember, we talked about it before.
But we have to
I think we have, we have had to put more money in because of the declining revenues. So, like, if you wanna bring us up to date on this.
Sure, Christopher Joint Fiscal, good afternoon, everyone. The reason why even looking at this language, there's a little bit of a history, but bottom line up front, this is a technical correction. It doesn't significantly change, the current fiscal picture, but it undoes something that wasn't properly done a year ago. So in Act 78, last year's big bill, there were some changes made to the allocation of this fee revenue to address the very issue you all have been talking about, that there's been declining revenues to these two special funds because the number of criminal and civil judgments has gone down very significantly in the last few years. The problem was the language that passed in Act 78 inadvertently changed the allocation retroactively back to 2009 in a way that wasn't administratively feasible to execute. So what you're seeing here in section 12, which was also in H880 that came over from the House, and there's a little write-up in the fiscal note for 880 that I'm cribbing here. But what this does is fixes the glitch and makes this language look like it should have to conform to your intent a year ago. So if you look at, I'm looking at today's calendar now, the change in sub C and sub D, that is actually undoing the erroneous change that happened a year ago and restoring the split back to the way it was for older violations, which is why you see the allocations going down in the edit. And the new section in E is what sort of fixes the glitch for violations moving forward that were committed after June 30th, 2023. So in effect for FY 24. It's my understanding that my colleague Grady Nixon has been in touch with the judiciary and finance and management, and they have been able to transact the intent in FY 24 as you all had previously expressed it. But we need this language to pass to sort of officially correct things the way they should be moving forward. So this is not a significant departure from what you all had attempted to do a year ago.
It's a lot of fixing.
This is fixing it and making sure that the language reflects something that is administratively feasible to execute.
And that's really simple, doesn't address the problem of the declining revenue.
Yeah, that's a whole separate issue. But yeah, to sort of summarize the change, prior to a year ago, out of that $47, $29.75 went to the Victims Compensation Special Fund, $10 went to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund, and the remaining $7.25 went to the General Fund. And what this language does is it basically takes the $7.25 that would have gone to the General Fund and apportions it to those other two special funds.
Great, question. So we don't have to vote because obviously we don't have the bill, but it explains why it would have come here ordinarily. And implications are, I mean, it's just technical correction. So they it worked the way we intended. And the only difference is it's just splitting up the revenues between the two funds and nothing to the general fund.
I don't see why it would even have to come here. I mean, it's nice that we reviewed it and know what's
And
happening.
it isn't coming here.
But it would have.
It would have if I didn't ask to have it not referred.
How can we already did it?
Yeah. So that's why it was just so that we can take the bill of it, not take more time to have it come here.
And to be clear, your colleagues across the hall heard the bill yesterday.
Yeah.
I believe it was yesterday. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. It's all blurry.
Even though there's no change in the overall.
Since it's impacting a finer fee, it's within their jurisdiction, but no, the practical impact of the change is not significant. It's really just some cleanup.
So that's good. I'll just get off. We don't have the bill, we don't have to vote, and I can just comment that we did review it and we have no problem with the children. Okay, thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
And so we have 5 minutes before we go back on the floor again.
I'm gonna go check in the house and make sure that we agree on this.
You're gonna do the T-bill.
Oh, we are going to? Oh,
Conference committee, the conference committee.
Oh, okay.
Next up.
Nice to see y'all, thank you.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Drop by again,
Yes, I will, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
anytime.